according to the Dallas Morning News, Tony Pollard is expected to take another step in the Cowboys offense and get closer to the amount of carries that Zeke is getting. Now, anyone that watched the games, just eye test being what it was, would say that Pollard was probably the more explosive athlete of the two, averaging 5.5 yards per attempt. But in fairness to Ezekiel Elliott, he did have over 1,000 yards. He did have over 4 yards per carry, did have 65 receptions. So still very much involved in the offense. Go back to a couple years ago when Zeke signed that big contract. Many people, of course, said that the Cowboys would grow to regret it. And I think Tony Pollard is the perfect example of why it's tough to sign a running back to a long-term contract, because you can find so many talented running backs. Are we closer than we've ever been in Zeke's career to a 50-50 timeshare?
It's tough to say. He's definitely getting closer. I mean, we all heard the news that he's getting more involved in the offense. And from what I was reading from the article, it looks like he's going to get a lot more as a receiver as well. So he's a guy who maybe Zeke could be in the backfield and he kind of lines up a little bit towards the outside. And you might see him out there with like a CeeDee Lamb out there and, trying to get teams off guard and stuff like that. And, Tony Pollard's a very good receiver as well. I mean, he had almost 50 receptions,
46 to be exact, for 337 yards. So not too far behind Zeke. I think the important thing to note is that he was almost as dynamic as Zeke was on half the touches. He had 130 rushing attempts as opposed to Zeke, who had 237 attempts. So 100 less attempts, and he had over 700 yards. Very comparable numbers between the two running backs. I think what fantasy owners have to consider about this year is that Zeke at this current time, according to his ADP, and this is via Fantasy Pro, so we got the aggregate here, 30. He's going 30 right now in standard leagues. You go down to half point PPR, same deal, 30 overall. Tony Pollard is going in the 70s. So he is going essentially in the 7th round versus Zeke in the 3rd round in standard 12-team leagues. And that's a tough thing. Like when you're making the investment in those first early rounds into Ezekiel Elliott, when he could potentially be more of a complementary back to Tony Pollard. Now, we have seen running back situations in the past where we've seen backfields be able to sustain two running backs, two fantasy relevant running backs. Last year, you could look at the situation and say that was the case because Zeke, again, 1,000-yard rusher, Tony Pollard, 778 yards, 46 receptions, certainly someone that you don't mind plugging into your flex position. And even in other key spots, your running back 2 slot, Tony Pollard, could even be in deeper leagues. If you had to choose one to have the more productive year, who are you choosing? Is it still Zeke?
I still choose Zeke to have the more productive year. I mean, he's the number one guy, so obviously he's going to get the more bulk of the work. But even if Zeke does go before you can even think about getting him, I mean, Tony Pollard's not a bad option to pick up a little bit later. Like you said, he's going in the 7th round, and if nobody's even thinking about Pollard, boom, there you go. You can sneak him up, and you're still going to get productivity out of him.
So you think Pollard is someone that you could draft independent of Zeke Elliott?
I believe so. Absolutely. I mean, it's almost like a Kareem Hunt type situation. I mean, you have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, who are a dynamic duo in the NFL, but every time Kareem Hunt steps on the field, he's just as dynamic as a Nick Chubb and can get you that fantasy relevance.
Let me ask you this question. What is the pressure to potentially handcuff Pollard to Zeke?
The pressure for me personally, I don't think there's a whole lot of pressure to handcuff. I mean, like you said, Zeke's going 3rd round compared to a 7th round guy. If you can get either or, I think either or is a great pick no matter what.
So if you have Zeke in the 3rd round, let's say you drafted Zeke in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
Are you still targeting Pollard?
I would. I mean, why not? You can kind of use.
Would you jump at it, or would you wait until his 7th round value? Like, when I asked, do you have the pressure? I would say like I'm in the 5th round.
Okay.
Pollard's still there. I have some guys that might snipe me. Maybe live in New Mexico and I have a bunch of Cowboys fans in my league. What is that pressure?
Again, I don't think there's much pressure. I think you could wait until that 7th round value. I feel like a lot of the guys still towards those like later rounds are still trying to go for bigger name running backs and not looking at towards like the secondary. And even still, like once you hit about 6, fit 5-6 rounds, that's when you start drafting closer to backup running backs at that point. Because if you draft in fantasy football a lot, you notice running backs go very, very quickly because they're, well, very scarce. So they're not as depth or deep as a wide receiver position. So I personally think that you could wait until the 7th round, but even if you go around earlier in the 6th round, I don't think it's that bad.
If I want to be invested in the Cowboys backfield, I feel as though I would love to have Tony Pollard with the chance that Zeke misses time more than I would love to have Zeke with the chance that Pollard misses time. I feel as though if Zeke got hurt, and he's coming off an MCL injury too, by the way, in 2021. If Zeke got hurt or missed time this year, what does that do for Pollard? Where do you think that puts him in the running back conversation for this upcoming season?
I mean, I think he could produce high-end running back 2 numbers.
Is that the ceiling?
I don't think that's the ceiling. I think he could go a little bit higher. So I think he could be a borderline running back 1 almost, because he does have that added value that he can catch. I mean, he had almost close to 400 receiving yards. He also had almost 800 rushing yards. I mean,
but I would think about this though. Between Zeke and Pollard, they already had over 110 receptions just out of the backfield between just those 2 backs.
Right.
So if Zeke in this situation misses time, rather than giving some of those receptions to Zeke, who had 62, you're giving that all to Pollard, or at least the majority to Pollard. I'm sure there may be some other bench depth that still some carries or receptions, but still. So I think if Zeke is out of the equation, Pollard becomes a running back 1 must start to me. And that's even saying I recognize that the Cowboys offensive line is diminished relative to other years, but I think that Pollard's 7th round value is potentially one of the bigger steals of upcoming drafts, given that you're talking about an older running back. You're talking about a running back that hasn't necessarily been in the best shape the last couple of years. You're talking about a running back that had, again, a knee injury, albeit a minor knee injury that he was able to move past. I think the sleeper value in Tony Pollard, and sleeper relative, just considering he's still in the 7th round, is more valuable than it would be for me to jump at Ezekiel Elliott. And I still think, even though the ADP says that people are drafting him in the 3rd round, I still think that Zeke's name is going to carry enough weight that you're going to see him fly off the draft boards a little earlier in most of your buddy leagues, the leagues you have with your family and friends. I think that Zeke is still a big enough name that we're going to see him go in the 2nd round in a lot of drafts, where I would feel more comfortable waiting for Pollard in the 7th. Maybe I get lucky in the 8th round.
Tony Pollard is insanely good. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the NFL, and he deserves to get talked about a lot more. So if you could snag him, I would snag him. Like you said, that 7th round. If not, if 7th round is a heck of a steal, by the way. But if you can get him in that 5th, 6th, 7th, and like you said, Zeke is gone, or you could stack him and Zeke together. In case
you're talking about getting a running back 1 in the 7th round at that point.
That's a steal.
That's a league winner value.
That's a bargain.
That's the type of transactions that wins fantasy football leagues. And that's why I think Tony Pollard is so much more valuable than Zeke this year.
Yeah.
I mean, Zeke, for argument's sake, could be a running back 1 waiting to happen that you're getting in the 3rd round too. So there is value in Zeke if he lives up to his ADP, if he stays in the 3rd round. And maybe there's some people who are down on Zeke. Maybe there's the contrary to that, and you get him in the 4th round. He slips to that point. And if you do that, then your team is looking pretty good. You feel pretty good about your team coming out of draft day if that is the case, especially if you're the type to draft wide receivers early and wait at running back. But anyway, guys, let us know what you think about this Cowboys running back situation. How do you think this Pollard Zeke situation is going to shake out? Do you think it's going to be more of a 60-40 split, 70-30, 50-50? Drop below your thoughts. Leave a like on this video. Subscribe to this channel. From Juju Talk Sports and Andrew Hagenbaugh, we will see you next time.